Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and welcome back to another video. Today I will be doing the second installment of my Tale of Two Stories review and discussion videos. If you're unfamiliar with this video series, it's a series in which I take two novels that have very similar premises or a fiction and nonfiction pairing and discuss their similarities and differences, as well as my general thoughts on the two novels and kind of what worked for me in one novel and what may not have worked for me in another. There is one other video where I've used this format, which was for Real Life by Brandon Taylor and Days of Distraction by Alexandra Chang. I would really recommend both of those books. Would not necessarily recommend going to check out that video as it was very early on in the history of my YouTube career. Granted, I've only been doing this for 4 or 5 months or something, but it was like one of the first videos I filmed, and I'm not sure if the kind of level of knowledge that I have and level of confidence in front of the camera that I have now is really apt in that first video. But I will still put a link to it up in the cards above if you want to check it out and hear my thoughts on those two books, as they definitely were potential favorites of the year. Today, I'm going to be talking about two YA contemporaries with strong themes of political engagement and encouraging young people to get involved in our political system here in America. So the first of which is The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert. This I actually read as an early copy from Disney Hyperion through NetGalley, so thank you so much to the two of them for providing me with this copy, and this came out on July 7th. The second book I'll be discussing today is Yes, No Maybe So by Becky, Albertalli, and Aisha Saeed. This one came out on the 4th of February of this year and was published by Balzer and Bray. So before I get into the similarities and differences between these two YA contemporaries, I'm going to give a brief synopsis of the two novels, and then we will move on from there. So, to start off, The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert follows two high school seniors, Marva Sheridan and Duke Crenshaw. Marva is a very politically engaged senior. She has ideas and hopes of becoming a lawyer after going to college and has been spending the past several months prior to the election canvassing in her community to encourage people to register to vote and to vote in the election. Duke Crenshaw is excited to be voting in his first election, especially after the death of his older brother, who died while working as a community organizer advocating against gun violence, and his older brother actually passed away because of gun violence. So in honor to remember his brother's legacy of community engagement, he wants to participate in our political system. The novel begins with Marva successfully voting for the first time and being very excited to do so, but as soon as she's finished voting, she witnesses Duke being turned away from their polling place because of a lack of identification, and they cannot find his registration in their documents. So this sends Marva and Duke on a shenanigan-filled day-long adventure over the course of Election Day to try to make sure that Duke is registered to vote and that his voice is heard in our political system. On the other hand, Yes, No Maybe So by Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed follows two upcoming high school seniors, or rising high school seniors, Jamie Goldberg and Maya Riemann, who both get pressured for two very different reasons to work on a political campaign for a local Democratic candidate in suburban Atlanta that is running for a state office. The stakes of this particular election are raised when Jamie and Maya learn of a House bill put forth by the Georgia House regarding a ban on head coverings, which Jamie and Maya both recognize to be a blatantly racist and Islamophobic bill, and obviously that encourages them to continue to canvass, and it gets them also into some shenanigans related to political engagement and voting. So with those two brief synopsises, I will now get into the kind of similarities and differences between the two novels. So to start off with the similarities, both novels are obviously YA contemporary, so there's a romantic element to both of them. Also feature strong political messaging, particularly geared at young people who are maybe unsure of the importance of voting and what it means for the greater political system. Additionally, both novels, while discussing the importance of voting and the importance of being politically engaged, touch on a lot of really important thematic topics, specifically related to the marginalization and oppression of people of color in America, as both novels feature a very diverse cast of characters. The Voting Booth features two black characters. Marva is black, but she attends a very white private school, and so she interacts a lot with understandings of race because of her blackness being so apparent in her white private school, and Duke is biracial. His mom is white and his dad is black. Additionally, in Yes, No, Maybe So, Jamie is Jewish and his sister is preparing for her bat mitzvah, and Maya is Muslim and she is celebrating Ramadan for the first half of the novel, I would say. So there's a lot of discussion about their different religious traditions and cultures. Given their diverse backgrounds, these heavy-hitting topics include important topics such as anti-Muslim bills and Islamophobia more broadly in the United States, voter suppression across different marginalized groups, and also gun violence. As with most YA contemporaries, however, the heavier topics discussed in these two novels are lightened quite substantially by a lot of cuter aspects of the story, not to mention the romances that take place during both stories. For example, in The Voting Booth, Marva has a cat that is actually Instagram famous, at least locally within her community, that goes missing, and so that adds to the shenanigans that Marva and Duke have to involve themselves in over the course of this election day, given that they not only now have to find Duke the correct polling place and make sure that he's registered, but also make sure that they can find Marva's cat. And in Yes, No, Maybe So, as I said previously, Jamie's little sister Sophie is preparing for her bat mitzvah, and so Jamie's mom and grandmother are quite busy with the preparations for that, and that involves some silliness, as well as Jamie and Maya frequently go to Target and discuss their love of Target, which also brings some levity to the more hard-hitting topics discussed in these stories. Additionally, speaking of their families, both stories I found really had strong families and discussed the importance of family and family connections, which I always love to see in YA contemporaries. I think this is especially pertinent given that several of the families within the four main characters that we have in these two novels are not families that all live together necessarily. Several of the characters have divorced parents or separated parents, but they still either have a very loving parent who they primarily live with, or both parents are very loving and compassionate towards them, even if they are no longer in a relationship with the other parent. So in The Voting Booth, for example, Duke's parents have recently separated and obviously are going through a lot of trials in their own relationship due to the death of their eldest child, but they both still support him. And Marva's parents, on the other hand, are still together with one another and are also very supportive. Then in Yes, No, Maybe So, Jamie's parents are divorced and his dad is not really part of his family. However, Jamie does have his very supportive mother as well as his grandmother who lives with them full time. And his grandmother, much like Marva's cat, is also Instagram famous, which was very amusing to see and definitely brought some more levity to the story. Maya's parents, on the other hand, are actually experiencing a separation over the course of the novel. So discussion of the changing parental dynamics and the challenges that come with that is also something that's explored quite well in Yes, No, Maybe So. So the final similarity between these two novels that also is a difference in some ways is the way in which identity, particular identities that are marginalized in American mainstream culture, i.e. basically if you are not a white male Christian person, the kind of ramifications of those aspects of your identity as it relates to politics and how politics and the political system in America become personal to you because of some aspect of your identity. So this is discussed quite extensively in both novels. However, the kind of specifics of the identities of the characters are different within the two novels, as well as the kind of way that they interact with that identity. So in The Voting Booth, Marva and Duke both discuss their blackness quite extensively over the course of the novel, and particularly their blackness as it relates to the political system of America and voting as a way to gain equity and justice within the American political system. For kind of a more in-depth discussion on that whole aspect of the novel, I will actually put a link to Ashley from Bookish Realm, who, if you are not subscribed to Ashley, I would highly recommend. She makes great vlogs and she is the cutest baby in the entire world. I'll put a link to her review of The Voting Booth on YouTube as well as on Goodreads in the description box below if you want a kind of more in-depth analysis of the discussion of blackness and identity in The Voting Booth. I think Ashley has done a phenomenal job and she is an own voices reviewer. In Yes, No, Maybe So, Jamie and Maya also realize that voting and politics become very personal to the two of them because of their different religious identities. So Jamie is Jewish and there is some discussion of anti-Semitism in this novel, as well as Maya is Muslim, and there is a bill, as I said previously, put forth that is a pretty blatantly Islamophobic bill, so there's also a lot of Islamophobia and the ramifications of Islamophobia as it presents itself within politics and political engagement that's discussed in this novel. However, obviously the differences, and this leads nicely into the differences between these two novels, is the difference in the type of identity discussed. So whether that's your racial identity or your religious identity, both are able to make politics very personal for you, but are kind of manifesting themselves in people's lives in very different ways. Now moving on to some of the other differences between the two novels, the first of which being the difference in timeline. So as I said previously, the voting booth takes place over the course of only one day, similarly to The Sun is Also a Star, I think is what it's called, which was a popular YA novel several years ago, whereas Yes, No, Maybe So takes place over the course of several weeks. The novel is leading up to the special election that happens at the end of July, but the novel probably begins in mid-June. So we follow Maya and Jamie for about 6 weeks or so as they are canvassing, and so we do get to see Jamie and Maya's relationship develop a little more slowly and a little more intensely than Marva and Duke's does. Which that leads me nicely into the next difference, which is a difference surrounding the relationships in the novel. So as I said, the voting booth only takes place over the course of one day, and also Marva is actually with her boyfriend at the start of the novel. So they do break up officially before Duke and Marva declare their feelings for one another, but that means much of the kind of relationship driven drama is related to Marva being unable to date Duke because she's in a previous relationship, and not necessarily anything that's happening between Duke and Marva. However, in Yes, No, Maybe So, while there is also some miscommunication regarding the female character's inability to date the male character, it presents itself in a much different way, as both of them are technically single. However, Maya's religious beliefs require kind of more extensive examination and self-reflection, given that for her family, as a Muslim family, dating is something that is very special and is reserved for more serious relationships, and Maya's parents have strongly discouraged her from dating in high school as they don't think it's worth it. So there is a lot of miscommunication there, but also miscommunication in Yes, No, Maybe So over some smaller things as well. The final difference between these two novels is a difference in kind of distinct political views and the way in which political views are put forth. So in Yes, No, Maybe So, it is explicitly stated on the page that Jamie and Maya are canvassing for a progressive Democratic candidate whose name is Jordan Rossum, who in the author's note it is stated that Jordan Rossum is very heavily inspired by a Democratic candidate here in Georgia, John Ossoff. So there's a lot of discussion about the Republican Party and the racism of the Republican Party. That's made very explicit on the page that this is a book that is in support of the Democratic Party and the stances that the Democratic Party has. And it does explicitly villainize some members of the Republican Party, as they should be, in Georgia for being blatantly racist and actively suppressing the vote, putting forth bills that are Islamophobic, etc., etc. So there's an explicit, Democrats are the kind of path to the future aspect of Yes, No, Maybe So. However, in the voting booth, while there's a lot of discussion about political stances that traditionally are exclusively Democratic, such as the encouragement of getting everyone to vote and dismantling systems of voter suppression, there's not an explicit discussion of party affiliations, nor is there any discussion on specific political candidates. Marva is not canvassing, from what I recall, for a specific candidate, but instead just canvassing to encourage people to register to vote. So there is a difference somewhat in the political affiliations, but also I would argue that it's very easy to read a strongly Democratic left-leaning stance in the voting booth. It's just not explicitly stated on the page. So those are all my similarities and differences kind of discussion of these two novels. As I don't believe I said previously, I really enjoyed both of these novels quite a lot. I think they are fantastic at what they're doing in terms of exploring and emphasizing the importance of political engagement, particularly in young people who are potentially voting for the very first time in this 2020 election, which if you are watching this and you're not planning to vote, first, what are you doing? Make sure you're registered, learn about the candidates, learn about general issues, learn about the local elections happening in your area or in your state, and definitely do vote if you're here in the United States and you are able to. But I really enjoyed both of these novels, and I think they handled so much of the complexity of so many of the issues discussed with a lot of nuance and well thought out and kind of easy to digest points. So I really appreciated both of these. The voting booth I ended up giving 4 stars, and Yes, No, Maybe So I ended up giving 4.5 stars, in part because it is set here in Atlanta and I am from Atlanta, and so it was really fun to see the kind of personalized touches that they brought to this novel regarding Atlanta and Georgia politics more broadly. That is everything. Thank you so much for watching. If this is your first video that you've seen from me, my name is Jenny. I'd love to have you stick around. Additionally, if you've read either of these books or just want to talk to me about something else in the comments, please do leave a comment down in the comment section below, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.